Hi, I'm Patti Smith.
This is Bert Newton.
Hey, this is Karen.
I'm Sam from Interpol.
I'm Carlos from Interpol.
This is Martha Wainwright.
Alex from the Orb.
And you're listening to a Triple R archive on rrr.org.au.
We spoke to Beck last Friday over the phone. Of course, Beck Hansen doesn't really need an introduction. The incredibly prolific LA-based singer-songwriter, I guess, rose to fame in the early 90s with his Mellow Gold release, and 11 studio albums have followed since this, along with various other projects that he's been involved with. The album we just heard from, Modern Guilt, was released back in 2008 and produced by Danger Mouse. And that was the last time we heard from Beck with a full-length album release. He is back, though, with a brand new record called Morning Phase, which is more or less a companion album to Beck's Sea Change release that he put out 12 years ago now. It's making me feel rather old. Beck certainly still kept very busy in between that, though, with records, with his Song Reader project, which saw him release, I guess, an album's worth of new material, only in notated form via a book of sheet music, with the aim to encourage audience interaction, which has since expanded into a series of concerts with high-profile musicians and celebrities all contributing and interpreting these unrecorded Beck compositions. And there's also been Beck's ongoing record club, which is an informal meeting of various musicians, which have included Devendra Banhart to Thurston Moore and also Feist, reinterpreting an album in a day and documenting what happens. But many may not be aware, however, that Beck was suffering from a pretty severe back injury that he sustained while taping a music video. And around the time of recording his Modern Guilt album, he described that as a very painful process, and that it felt like he was making that record with his hands tied behind his back. That's what he said. And this new album, Morning Phase, which has just come out, Beck has described as a much more satisfactory experience, having been able to actually hold a guitar properly since recovering from this injury. And we began the interview by asking Beck to talk about what the experience was like to make this new album and how and why it felt so different for him.
Well, yeah, I mean, just being in a condition where you're able to play without any thoughts to any kind of physical state, it's a completely different thing, It's a kind of freedom. I always feel that you make the best with what you have, and I've always done that, So if there are limitations, you work on it in other ways. I've tried to produce records over recent years, when it was harder to play, and just put whatever energy I could at the time into whatever I was doing. But this was very much of a release, getting to do this record.
With the new album, I guess it's kind of a companion album to your Sea Change release from around 12 years ago. And though, while it's not, quite a direct sequel, you've said that it shares the same themes and sounds. Could you perhaps describe those and how they relate to you in terms of where you were then compared to how you are now?
Well, it's like anything. I mean, a record can be like a snapshot of a certain time, so it's not anything that I'm necessarily conscious of. It's just what came out and what happened at that particular time that I decided to go make a record. And there was a certain sound I was trying to capture, and the kind of song that I was cultivating on this new record and Sea Change, maybe a little bit on Mutations. These records are a little different from the other ones because they don't have loud guitars or beats. There's not really any dance rhythms. It's a different mood, and in a way, it's kind of freeing to be able to just go into a different space musically. To slow everything down and see what that does. And there's certain things that feel like I can sing about that resonate with these kinds of songs.
The new album sees you working together for the first time in many years with a lot of the musicians that you recorded Sea Change with, and you described it as the sound of "we're all here again." Can you describe what that experience was like?
it's one of those things where you get the gang back together, and it's really, it was like no time had passed, and reestablishing those relationships and that history, and there's a kind of richness there, and an appreciation that maybe I or some of them didn't have to that extent 15 years ago. And when you're playing with the people that you sat on a miserable bus ride in the middle of winter through Poland when you're 25, that's a particular kind of mutual experience that goes into that kind of music. So I'm really I was, there was a richness there for me personally that I felt that feels like some sort of outcome of a lot of years and time playing together, and so I'm so glad to do it again.
Beck, do you recall what the first song was from Morning Phase that you played together again in the studio with the guys?
It was the first song on the record.
Yeah.
And, I had this guitar that I used to play, and one of the first things I bought early, and, when I first made a little money, and it's just this really special guitar, and I hadn't been able to play it for years, and so we pulled it out. It was the first time recording with it in that studio, and it just has a certain sound. That's the sound you hear at the beginning of Sea Change, that guitar. And that guitar had a lot of songs in it. I was just tuning up with the musicians, and I started playing those chords because those chords were exactly how I felt being in the room with them. We just all fell in together and recorded it quickly. It felt like the way to start the record.
Something that's really interesting is you write so much music, but so much of what you do is also discarded, I guess, before people get a chance to hear it. What qualities do you identify in the songs that actually do make it onto your albums that differ from those that don't?
Well, there's different things. I mean, there's the kind of song that just comes out completely formed. You have the chorus, the lyrics, the instrumentation, everything. And then there's other ones that you're not so sure about, and I'll be stubborn and really work on some of those songs for a long time to get them right. But how do you know that they're worth pursuing? Or it's hard. It's really instinct and sometimes a leap of faith, because you can certainly beat a dead horse. I think some people are very in tune with the kind of music they need to be making, or the thing that really is true to something within them, and you can recognize that in their music. It just feels like this music is part of it. And then you can hear other music that feels very fabricated and constructed, and that somebody's sort of just projecting something onto a song, and it's not really coming from them, in the way that something else might. So I guess I'm usually just looking for something that feels like it fits, or that it just works somehow. Because I'll go into and say I want to write something, that you could dance to, that somebody could put on, and it just make them want to move. And sometimes you can't force that. Sometimes I'll try it, and it's just not working. It just sounds ham-fisted. And then other times it just happens, and it's effortless. So I don't know what that is. I guess that's what I'm looking for, kind of effortlessness. There's a lot of effort to get to effortless.
That's true.
When it comes to songwriting, you've described a very kind of interesting and complicated line between what is universal and what is cliche. For instance, you've said the ones that go over the edge are the ones that become the classics. Is it difficult to avoid falling over the edge?
Yeah, it's difficult, yeah. I don't know how certain songs just strike a balance. They have a certain universal nature to them, and something that's recognizable that people can relate to in a way, and then it maybe has something new that you've never heard before either. There's a novelty to it, and there's something that's startling and surprising, but also familiar. That's a really that's an obscure thing to try to find. That's a needle in a haystack. So we're all kind of, I think anybody who's making music or writing songs, they're all kind of panning for gold of some kind, and then hopefully you get to have some adventures along the way that make it worth it, even if you don't find any gold. It's still worth doing. I think, even if somebody doesn't come up with the song that is the song of songs, that person might come up with something that gives somebody else another idea to try this, it gives somebody another idea, and then after about 10 people, then somebody stumbles on it, I believe in that kind of relay race, leapfrog metaphor. Is individual an expression as songwriting or song making is, that there is an aspect of it is as a kind of team effort, even if it's among a generation of musicians or even across generations. It's a weird endeavor, certainly. Tom Waits was telling me when I had a conversation with him a few years back, where he described as songs as these strange things that we're doing with the air. That's really what it is. It's manipulating air.
Beck, I guess loneliness is something that you've mentioned you've faced yourself as a songwriter. How would you say you've attempted to overcome this and connect with others through some of your recent projects?
Well, yeah, I mean that's one of the first things that you write about. I mean, that the music is whether it's celebratory, whether it's music for square dancing music or tribal music, rock and roll, dance music. It's this thing that's being created to express something, but also that negative space of life, that kind of silence. It's this facilitator that breaks up that emptiness, the silence, the thing, the place where nothing's happening. It's a way to make something happen. I've always been interested in collaborating and doing things with people. Loser was that. I mean, Loser was recorded at a time where I was playing in bars and small clubs, solo acoustic. I had no band. I just had an acoustic guitar, and I would play with other people on their projects, and I met this kid who had a drum machine and an 8-track recorder, and we did that song Loser, and it was so to me it was another, and another night I probably was at someone else's house, and we did some folk songs together. I was always working on different things with different people, and that's something I've always done. I always wanted to be in a band, and it didn't work out that way. I didn't grow up in a place and wasn't around where there were other musicians who needed someone like me in their band, and and didn't know musicians to start a band with me. So I just ended up being a solo artist, not by intent. So, I always look for things to do with others.
Speaking of collaborations, I hear there's some high-profile collaborations that could be made available before the end of the year. Rumours of Pharrell Williams and also perhaps some of the session musicians that recorded Michael Jackson's Thriller. Is there any truth to these rumours?
Well, those are things I've worked on over the years. I did do a lot of recording with some of those musicians that you were talking about 4 years ago. Right now, I'm just working on different songs, and I'm trying to figure out what exactly I'm trying to do with it. I have songs, I could put together and put out a record, but I'm trying to shape it into something that I feels necessary. It feels like it expresses something. That's often that's what I'll start with, a feeling that I'm trying to express in a record, and a general kind of mood and a tone. Maybe some of that stuff will fit into all that. I don't know. I'm not sure yet. And the work I did with Pharrell was a while back, so I think his dance card is pretty full at this point. I don't know. Maybe he'll call me back. We'll do that. We'll finish some of those songs. I've been wanting to work with him for about 15 years, and we finally did get to work together. After years of running into each other in an elevator, we finally did get to work together, but I don't think anybody could have seen the success that he's had in the last year. I'm sure that'll go for quite a while. That stuff might not see the light of day for a while.
We've been talking a lot with you about songwriting and sort of, that complicated line between what is universal and what is cliche. And I guess many songs rely on cliches to communicate with audiences, but you've stated that you want or wish to articulate things that are in between and find the in-between feeling. What did you mean by this in-between feeling, and how difficult is it to capture those emotions?
Yeah, what I was trying to say is that there are very kind of traditional ways to express things in different idioms. Certain things in rap music, for like hip hop, there's certain phrases that are used over and over. In blues music, the same thing. There's certain images that are recycled over and over. In pop music, again, there's certain sentiments and phrases that you'll hear repeated over and over. I spent a lot of time thinking about those conventional ways of expressing a sentiment in a song and how to pull those apart and maybe say them in a different way. Or, they say that there's only a handful of songs. There's maybe half a dozen songs. There's the love that you just met or found, and you're paying tribute to that. Then there's the love lost. Then there's the angry, song. There's these kind of standard songs that are made over and over and over, and especially for, I think, people at my age at that certain time coming up, kind of after classic rock and after punk and after 80s music, and the rock era had been completely explored, and no stone was left unturned. What are we going to say with it now? What's left? So there was I feel like there was a bit of that happening in the 80s and 90s, and maybe more recently. And I like words. I like seeing what they can do and how they work in a song, and I've tried to say things in songs that isn't necessarily the way 500 other people have already said it. So what's the point? We're just recycling something that already happened. But there is a beauty to that as well. You have to recognize you can't just throw out the certain tried and true things. So I think, as time goes on, I've vacillated between the extremes many times, and trying to find that sort of balance in between. I think that's probably a place where the great songwriters have ended up. Whether you're talking about the Gershwins or the Beatles or Leonard Cohen or on and on, these great songwriters have maybe been able to balance these things. Trying to find some sense of personal expression and originality, and maybe something that's innovative or new, balanced with something that is primal and part of a sort of basic human way of seeing and experiencing.
There's an interview where you mentioned a Werner Herzog documentary you saw looking at ancient artifacts in Europe, including the discovery of like really early woodwind instruments, and you reflected on the idea that humans have had the ability to produce any melody or sequence of sounds that exist in popular music for tens of thousands of years. So there's this idea that everything is somewhat of a discovery of what was already there, and perhaps creating something new, and maybe there's an excitement in that for you as well, would you say?
Yeah, I almost burst out laughing. Not because it was funny, but just in a kind of relief and disbelief, seeing this scientist who's playing the Star Spangled Banner on a 30,000-year-old flute made out of a deer antler. Because it's a relief in the sense that here you are as a musician, struggling to come up with something new and something unique and that has a reason to exist. And ultimately it's a futile exercise because, all these things have existed before, whether it is the Beatles or Nirvana or Taylor Swift, there's pieces of all these melodies. There's only so many ways to combine them. So I think some of these things have been with us longer than we could imagine. Some of these melodies, some of these musical ideas, some of these modes of expression.
What then are some of the considerations or reflections that sort of lead you into a direction for what happens next in terms of your releases or albums or projects?
Yeah, well, like this record that's coming out, Morning Phase, I have had that record in mind for years, probably 7 years, and been writing songs in that vein for a long time, and I have other records in mind. At this point, I know the amount of work that it takes to get one of these ideas down and actually do it properly. It's a bit of instinct, just knowing what's the right time for that particular thing, and I did take advantage of a number of years in the last half decade or so, trying a lot of different things and seeing how this feels and that, and maybe I should do a blues record, or maybe I should do something that's more electronic, So it's a combination of things. So that's what I've been thinking about a lot for the last year, and what kind of songs that we could add that in a way, in an almost kind of chemical way that could combine with the other songs that I already have to make a certain thing happen. That's what I'm thinking about right now. What exactly that kind of sound is, and how I want to express it. I think there are a number of records I've put out that are a little heavier, have darker colors in them, and I think I'm drawn to the idea of something that has a bit of celebration, and I'm not sure. I'm still grappling with it. I guess you can tell that.
Listening there to Gimme from the artist Beck, which was the concluding release or a single that he put out last year as part of a trio of standalone singles, which was his first kind of studio material released at that point since Modern Guilt was put out in 2008. And just been listening to a brilliant extended discussion with Beck. Really interesting to hear his thoughts. Certainly Beck, an artist with an extraordinary and very singular contribution to music, someone whose experiences and various projects give him a unique view on the art of songcraft. So great to hear Beck's views on the emotional threads that can be drawn throughout the history of all recorded music, what it takes to make something meaningful not only to himself and to others, and also looked at the idea of connecting with other artists to overcome loneliness in music, and left us with some thoughts of an uncertain but no doubt very productive future ahead as well.
Triple R.
For complete access to the Triple R archives, which include over 100 interviews, live-to-air performances, documentaries and other Triple R specials, become a subscriber via the link on our website. Thanks for listening to Triple R.